and welcome to today's webinar. Today, I'm so excited to be sharing with you a very exciting topic. We're talking about game changers, youth sports facilities as anchors for new mixed-use developments. This is a trend we are seeing across the nation right now. We want to bring it to you today. We're talking about how community leaders and real estate developers are partnering together to leverage youth, sports, tourism, and organized sports facilities as anchors for new developments in master real estate developments, including hotels, restaurants, retail, and residential. So that's all coming over the next hour. I'm Ashley Whitaker. I'm going to be your moderator and your host today. I'm joined by two excellent speakers who are going to introduce themselves in just a second. Before that, I have just a couple housekeeping notes for you. The first, this is being recorded and it will be available in the next 48 to 72 hours. So look online in your emails where you registered so you can come back and reference this again. Also, we will be taking Q&A throughout the session. So if you have questions that come up, please don't hold them to the end. Don't feel like you have to. Pop them in that chat. I'll pull them forward as I can, but we are going to leave about 15 or 20 minutes at the end. We think there's going to be a lot of questions as we go through this topic today. So with that, I'm going to let our speakers introduce themselves, starting with Jake Whitaker.
Yeah, really excited about today's call and today's topic. I'm Jake Whitaker. I'm the Sports Facility Company's Senior Vice President of Development Services. So I've worked on hundreds of projects and helped build about 25 here at the Sports Facility Companies. I've been here for about 6 years, and I have an additional 10 years in the sports industry on the manufacturing and the specialty contracting side. Excited about the topic.
My name is Eric Sullivan. I'm one of the founding partners of the Sports Facilities Companies, and I lead a lot of our strategic relationships in the industry, our business development team, as well as get to work with a lot of exciting projects, and specifically a lot of exciting mixed-use development projects. So really excited about the topic today. Just as far as background, the Sports Facilities Company, I'm going to get a quick overview and then you'll get a flavor for who we are and what we do, I'm sure, throughout the presentation. But my commitment is we're not going to make this a commercial. We got plenty to talk about in mixed-use development. But real quick, our backstory is that we were founded in 2003, really on the planning and pre-development side of the industry, doing market research, feasibility studies, pro formas for groups that wanted to develop some type of sports, fitness, recreation, entertainment facility. That's now grown into an organization that includes really 3 primary divisions: pre-development, as I just mentioned, development, the actual design and construction of these venues, and then certainly operations is the largest footprint of what we do. And what that means is actually coming to the community, to the venue, hiring the staff, training the staff, running programs, running events, working with great programming partners and event partners throughout the industry. We've been really fortunate to serve over 3,000 communities since 2003. We've got an incredible team, over 2,500 full-time team members, and they help us to operate and oversee over 60 venues that are out there in the industry. Now, in addition to that, we'll do about 150 to 200 feasibility studies a year. So what we're talking about related to planning and how do we decide what's right for us and our development as a potentially sports-anchored mixed-use development, we're going to be drawing on that experience where we've been able to come in and serve communities, economic development corporations, tourism bureaus, and DMOs, as well as a whole bunch of great types of sports organizers and stakeholders in the community.
Wonderful. Jake, Eric, thanks for being here with us today. Thanks for that quick intro to Sports Facilities Companies. Let's dive into the topic. So we're talking about youth sports today. And I think for a lot of people that conjures images of, local t-ball leagues or regional basketball tournaments, but we're talking about something that's a little bit of a bigger picture than that. It's a mix of the $52.2 billion youth and amateur travel sports industry and organized local sports and community events. It's something that's mixed use in itself, multi-purpose. This is really a paradigm shift of where we've been even over the last 10 years. So Eric, can you talk a little bit about the evolution of the industry and kind of how did we get to this kind of facility today?
Yeah, that great question. At the risk of a history lesson, I'm going to go back about 20 years. When you go back to the early 2000s, what you saw a lot of public projects and a lot of private projects. And public projects might look like a tennis club. They might look like a private swimming facility. It might look like a soccer club that owned their own fields. And then you had public facilities that were primarily park and rec type facilities where they were hosting all types of different community pursuits and recreation. When all of a sudden we saw really the banking climate turn on its head in 2008, we had the Great Recession. What we saw was all the new projects dried up, right? There was a period of time from 2008 to 2010 where very few projects came out of the ground in our country. And what happened though during that time was, as consumers, how we traveled, how we played, how we interacted as families and communities changed. And what was interesting is that if you go back to those early days, Wall Street didn't really care about sports so much, and a lot of the big development groups didn't necessarily care about sports so much. But during the economic recession and the decline, what we had was, during that period of time, sports was the only sector of tourism to not have 2 consecutive quarters of decline, and was the fastest to rebound as we came out of the recession. So what that meant is, all of a sudden people started to pay attention, and sports tourism blew up. You've all heard that term, I'm sure, sports tourism, putting heads in beds through sports events and tournaments and camps and all those different types of things. So as that boom took place, what happened was the market craved, demanded, warranted bigger, better, newer, nicer venues. And so what happened was, all of a sudden, some of the first early movers and shakers were tourism-based communities that had additional inventory that started to build these large facilities to accommodate different types of tournaments and activities. As other communities saw the impact that they had on their overall fabric as a community and the benefits and the positives, there was a lot of, ooh, we want one of those too. And so what happened was, the development climate really evolved into what we see today. And what we're going to talk about today as we go deeper, and I'm starting really macro, we're going to talk about public-private partnerships. We're going to talk about creative funding mechanisms. We're going to talk about some case studies of groups and communities who have done a great job of leveraging these different changing tides in our industry and really put them to work. And so, as Ashley mentioned, where we've grown to today, current days, we're over a $52 billion industry, according to Sports ETA, which is a great sports tourism-driven association that I'm sure several of you are familiar with and even might participate in. And what's happened is, it's created this really unique and incredible landscape of a 3-legged stool, where we have communities and stakeholders who are investing in facilities. We have the actual, destinations that those facilities live. You've got the content, who are looking for different places to go out and to find where there is an appropriate place. Then you've got different operators. You've got different types of operators, whether they be national governing bodies or NGBs, or tournaments and rights holders, people who own content. And now, as we think about where we are today, the reason we're talking about mixed use developments is the magnitude and impact of these sports and recreation facilities is demanding, warranting, needing more. And so what we're going to learn is, how do restaurants, retail, hotels, and other types of commercial pursuits play into a sports-driven or sports-anchored mixed-use development?
One of the things you touched on there, Eric, that I think is helpful for the audience, is really measuring beyond economic impact. So that's been a KPI in youth and amateur travel sports for, again, about a decade. And now I think we're seeing a shift happening right here in terms of mixed use, multi-purpose. How are those KPIs shifting as well?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm sure you've all heard the term heads in beds. I've already used it once during this presentation, and that was the measuring stick, right? How many people are we bringing to the market? And as we used that as a measuring beacon, what we found is that it wasn't taking into account some of the other things related to the actual investment in the facility. How are we doing on a P&L standpoint? Are we doing the right programs, events, activities, ancillary business units to actually create a strong enough revenue stream to help cover our operations and start to contribute towards debt? What we've also seen is, we've seen a real focus on community impact. If we're going to build the Church for Easter Sunday, we're going to build this great big venue, and we're going to be full on the weekends, evenings, and during off times of the year, how is the community coming to play here 24/7, right? And it used to be that sports tourism was just reserved for the weekends in the summer. What we're really focused on now is, how are we serving the community and the tourism opportunities harmoniously throughout 7 days a week, 12 months a year? And so the measuring stick, I would say, Ashley, is a lot more evolved than just looking at, heads and beds. It's now about community impact. It's now about cost recovery. It's now about the impact we have into other businesses, into the community. And when you think about these destinations from a standpoint of placemaking and identity and how they create these really wow moments in today's world, Instagrammable moments, right? That people are going to talk about and be proud of. You don't just have to be there visiting one time a year. It can be the facility that's in your community that you're going to just to see what's happening tonight. Is a movie in the park, or is it a high level showcase event? Or am I just going to go have fun and drop in and play ball with my friends?
Yep. Yep. So we're talking about these sort of conversion of some of these industries, how that's affecting KPIs, how that's affecting development. And so I want to turn to you, Jake. As organized sports and sports travel have boomed, there's a lot of case studies out there of facilities that have been planned and built by a municipality or a real estate developer, and they're proven economic development drivers. You can look at the parcels around them and you can see new hotels, restaurants, retail popping up after the fact. So there's a little chicken and egg there. What we're talking about today is really sort of purpose built. Can you do both at the same time? So can you share a little bit about, what's driving that next level vision, and how do you do that in the development landscape?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's multiple reasons. And picking up off of what Eric said, it's a proven economic impact. It started in the tourism communities, and it was proven that it kind of works there. At that point, a lot of communities were building these facilities, and the development would come around it. They'd build the facility, and then later the development. But as the markets are continuing to evolve, now there's many, many markets that want to be able to do that, where it all has to be part of one project. That and the growth of P3 type of projects really create a unique environment where these mixed use development sports anchored facilities are really thriving. Another reason why this is growing and a growing trend is that full destination experience. When we take in our families, when we're taking our families to play ball, when we're taking our kids, it's not just about the event. It's about the weekend. It's about what am I doing after the event. So the whole community has to offer something. And the more that we can put it all into one project, the more that we can stay near it, the more that we can eat near it, the more that we have an overall experience that is great and grand. The more that we can differentiate our communities for and as a destination.
So one of the things that I know we've spoken about before was, COVID really put a damper on things for a little bit, right? In terms of new facility development and development cost. Has that had any implication in your opinion, or what you've seen in the industry and how these projects are getting done?
Yeah, on the positive side of sports, right? COVID was a very quick rebounder. People wanted to get outside. They wanted to get back on the field. The physical wellness, mental wellness, all of it was, grew because of COVID and our focus on that. So that grew the demand for it. At the same time, we had a lot of construction costs, and those escalated through COVID. It is more expensive now to build a project than it was in the past, which just means there has to be more creative funding mechanisms. And a lot of these projects are finding those through those P3, through using them as a mixed use anchored sports facility. So we're seeing that as a huge growth and why this trend is growing.
And just following up on that too, Jake, when you think about that P3, we think about who's benefiting. So can you talk a little bit about, who benefits when a new mixed use development like this comes up? Is it just the developer? Is it just the hoteliers? There's a lot of stakeholders involved.
Yeah, it may sound cliche, but everybody's kind of winning on this. When you create that final destination, the participants have a better experience. The spectators have a better experience. The community is driving more economic impact and more spend in their communities, which is creating more jobs. It's creating more restaurants. It's creating more experiences for the local community too. And as Eric touched on, it's creating better surfaces for playing and for the local communities to have access to that they wouldn't have access to if it wasn't for this driver. On the other end, developers are really benefiting because the demographics of the youth and amateur sports is a great one. These are the people who oftentimes have disposable income. So they're spending their weekends, and they're spending them at also retail and in the dining when they go and they have the weekend and the time to spend. So the developers are able to bring in more retailers that they might not be able to with higher lease rates and create an overall mixed use destination that is really creating the new and best experiences in our communities.
Definitely. And I think it's important to note too, when we talk about the demographics of this audience, they are a great traveling families. They can afford to do this. And when we talk about community benefit, we know behind the scenes that we also work in access to people who cannot afford to travel as well, right? We want those local people in their own communities, in their backyards, to be able to come and play and experience that type of facility as well. Eric, so you mentioned earlier, SFC sees a ton of projects. We do many feasibility studies a year. So what makes a project go from great idea to grand opening where others get stalled? Is there a recipe that's, that you can just recreate in community after community, or how does that work?
There is a recipe, but there's not a one size fits all recipe. There is no silver bullet in this space. And I think just to take a moment and talk about what we're seeing in the most successful projects. We've mentioned P3 a couple of times. I'm sure, as you all know, that's an acronym for public-private partnerships. And there's a lot of mystery. There's a lot of ideas about what that is. I'm going to make it really simple. P3 is just a delivery model. All that means is that we are leveraging resources on the public side and resources on the private side to create a great destination in the community. When we think about what makes a great destination of a community, oftentimes there's a lot of diversity that comes with that. And so what we're seeing in facilities now is if you were to go back 20, 15, even 10 years, you'll see a lot more purpose-built facilities. And what I mean by that is all of a sudden we're building a volleyball gym that is going to be, home to the local volleyball club, and we're going to train in there, and we're going to host some competitions in there. But it's really a volleyball facility. When you look at some of these bigger, better, newer, nicer venues, yes, they absolutely can be a world-class volleyball venue, but they're probably also bringing in basketball, cheer, dance, martial arts, home shows, trade shows, speakers, concerts, all of these other types of uses. Because when we think about a successful project in the realm of mixed use development in public-private partnership, it's not just sports tourism. We don't just want heads in beds. We want traffic, and we want regular, repeatable, predictable traffic. And when we have that, it becomes much, much easier to communicate the benefit to why you want to come on this journey with us. And when I say who wants to come on the journey, it's the hoteliers, it's the retailers, it's the different types of entertainment opportunities that are out there. And one of the cool trends that we saw in professional sports, years ago, that's evolved into the Wrigleyvilles and other types of ballpark villages, is this integration of a great guest experience while you're still there for something in particular. And in sports tourism, and specifically in mixed use development for communities, we're seeing that diversity be really, really key. How many times and how often do we want to come back, and do we want to be in this space? And so they're serving a much, much broader scope of the community. One of the other things that we're seeing is a real creative approach to financing. So as I mentioned, there isn't a one-size-fits-all recipe or a silver bullet, but what there are proven economic, I'll say, programs that can be implemented, that can be used. And these are like tools in the toolbox for an economic development council or for a community. And what's interesting is oftentimes when we're talking about these projects, it's the first of its kind in that community. So there is a learning curve that comes with this. And one of the things that we're helping to do every day is connect the dots. And when I say connect the dots, it's how does the high tide raise all boats? Jake made a great comment about, everybody wins, and it sounds a little bit utopian and too good to be true. But if a mixed use development truly is built for success in a community and becomes that fabric of the community and has the placemaking opportunities and has the green space and the parks and the place that you can just go have a great family day, and it also has the place where you can go to a Topgolf, or you can go to a professional sporting event, or you can go to your volleyball practice on a Tuesday night, what it's doing is it's making it a much more well-rounded destination throughout the seasons of the year and the times of the day. So during the day, these mixed-use developments are still vibrant with the traditional commercial retail that's driving consumers throughout the day and the week. During the evenings and the weekends, sure, you've got the restaurant traffic and you've got the just out of town consumer traveling traffic. But what it's doing is it's creating something for all. And I'd say, Ashley, in the trends that we're seeing that are most successful, they're very diverse in nature. They're bringing a lot of stakeholders around the table. And then they're leveraging these creative economic engines or tools to allow the dollar to go further. And so I could acronym you to death with TIFs and PIFs and TIDs and TERs and all these different things out there. And that's probably its own webinar that we'll follow up with. But what it really is it's understanding from the private sector, how can the public be a good partner to my vision, to my project? As a public sector, how can we leverage the private development and the private dollar to bring hotels, restaurants, retail, recreation amenities to my community? And at the end of the day, who I think wins the most is the consumer. It's the community itself, because now we've got a multi-generational destination that people could come truly live, work, play, recreate, and just really connect with people. And I think that's what's so special about these. And so the projects that are most successful, I think, aren't doing this in a vacuum and keeping it to themselves. It's kind of the opposite. They're shouting it from the rooftops and they're getting people on board, because if the train's going to leave the station, it does take a number of different stakeholders to help lead to the ultimate end result.
I think what you touched on really successfully about the multi-generational destination, wide variety of stakeholders. There's so many people that can benefit. There's so many stakeholders that, to be successful, really need to dive into it. That feels like a challenge, a design challenge. How do you go about creating this destination that serves all of these purposes? And so, Jake, I want to turn that question to you. You are in that design process with developers, municipalities, not just the facility itself, but the overall destination. Can you talk about some of the design considerations or minimum requirements? How do you get in the game here?
Yeah, absolutely. So it is two parts, right? It's the overall project and community, and then it's the facility itself. So on the overall project and community, every community has really unique things to offer. And one of my favorite things when we get too involved in a project is learning the proudness when you start talking to the mayors and the city council mayors about, and the city council men and women, on why they want people to visit their community and what they have to offer. Because there's so many so many municipalities across the US that have so much to offer, that want visitors and they want people to experience them on different nights. And embracing that is a big key on what's unique to it. So consumer preference, it is, don't get back in the car if you don't have to, right? Where can we create stay to play? Where can we create the right restaurants? Where can we create the hotels that are attached to it? Where can we get the right developers involved that are bringing the right retail and the right experiences to it as well? Entertainment is a huge piece of this equation as well. It's because after you're done playing for the day, you want a great team experience at night. So whether or not you're going in and having a arcade, or whether or not you're doing some top golf experiences, regardless of what you're doing, that overall experience of the community is extremely important, and people wanting to come back and wanting to come visit your community again. And then you get into the facility design, and Eric hit the nail on the head, where it is the multi-purpose, so we can drive more traffic consistently. How do we drive, basketball maybe one weekend, volleyball another weekend, so we get new traffic, consistent traffic, so we fill the calendar and all the seasons of the year, to drive consistent traffic to these projects, to create that reliable spend, which is then driving and allowing these projects to be funded.
Absolutely. We got a couple of questions that have popped up while you guys were talking, so I'm gonna throw a couple at you, and then we'll get back to our regular scheduled programming. But one of the questions that came in from Anonymous is, do you have access to data that we can share on understanding the cost per square foot for a multi-sport indoor facility? And certainly that varies, but I know this is information you guys kind of have on the tip of your brain here. So what can you share on that front? How much does it cost to get in the game here?
Yeah, absolutely. It varies by market, right? To build across the US, it'll vary, type of construction, size of projects. There's a lot of variables obviously in there, but somewhere between $200 and $300 a square foot on an indoor multi-court tourism or traffic driving type of facility is usually what we're seeing. And every market's different depending on how many courts you need and what's going to be supported, not only by the out of town traffic, but also by the local traffic and local use, because it's got to be supported there as well. On the indoor side, it's usually, an 8 basketball, 16 volleyball to be a regional. And we're talking 12 basketball or more, 24 volleyball or more for kind of a national type of destination. But we see them in smaller regional ones as well. And by using flexible spaces, we can often drive higher traffic by using those spaces also as convention centers during the week and with other spaces when there might not be the demand of all year.
Makes sense. One other question before we get back to locally or regularly scheduled program here. The P3s, are they typically done at the local, the regional, or state level? Eric, do you want to lead us off on that question?
Yeah, that's a great question. And part of the reason I preface that P3 is a delivery model is it can really be malleable based on the community and based on who's involved. And so I'll just give you a couple examples. There are projects that are more privately led, and they are truly a private development related to retail, hotels, hospitality, restaurants, and sports. And then what they're doing is they're leveraging unique programs like Star Bonds, which is in about a half a dozen states out there, and it's a sales tax rebate program. That I would say is a more privately led development with the use of a public tool. There are more publicly driven public-private partnerships where they're floating general obligation bonds, or they're using a specific tax like a TDT, where they're using tourism dollars to fund these bonds. But then they're using the private delivery model of a developer who's going to come in at risk to deliver that, so they don't have some of the often overruns that come with municipal projects and other delivery models. And so the question really specifically is, as it at a city, mix in their township, village, state, or federal level, it's all of the above. Most of the projects that we see are driven by more local tax bases. And so those typically happen at the city and the county level. When you start to get up into some of the larger projects, though, and you start to talk about things like Star Bonds or other programs out there, those are often state level programs where we're actually seeing state funding come into these projects. And we mentioned COVID, and how did that change the landscape? Everyone's heard of ARPA, I'm sure, and all of the different funding that came into that. There wasn't sports as a specific outlet, but there was infrastructure, there was education, there's a lot of things that check the boxes with these types of mixed use developments. And that's where the state's been able to step in with things like roadway improvements and dollars that don't have to be paid back. It's not debt. It's actually just a one-time contribution to the project to help it come out of the ground. And I would say less on a federal level, but there are examples, opportunities out there. In the Gulf Coast region, we're seeing some storm hardened structures. And I mean, give you a very serious real life example. We opened last year the Fort Bend Epicenter in Houston. I'm sure you're all aware from national news. Houston was just hit with a hurricane yesterday. Part of what our mission and charter is as a venue is to serve as a storm recovery location. And what that means is different things. It could be that we're bringing in utility trucks. It could mean that we're bringing in, actual cots and giving people a place to stay in refuge, or it could mean a number of other things. But ultimately what it means in that program, we are seeing federal dollars come in from FEMA that can actually help to support the operation. So it is at every level, but I'd say the most concentrated effort is usually at that city county level.
Yeah, makes sense. So I think we're getting the picture here that it's not a one size fits all recipe on the design of the facility, on the capital stack, how these things work together. So Eric, if I'm on the webinar today, I'm a developer municipality, how do I know what to build? Every community engagement session ends up with pickleball is the fastest growing sport in the nation, which it is, third year in a row, but also, hey, we need aquatics, we need more volleyball space. So you have, again, a lot of stakeholders. What do you need to know? What's going to be viable and what's going to meet those goals and definitions of success?
Yeah. So these are long, large projects, right? And I want to start there because I want to manage expectations. Typically, when we see a project come across our plate and it's a great idea and it might have some of the things incubated, but it's really at its infancy, those are often 2 to 3 year projects to actually bring them through planning, funding, development into operations. And I think what's really important there is that you're doing the right level of research. And so if I were to think about that in kind of 3 buckets, I would say, 1, what's the market support? What is there a market opportunity here for? And that's going to look like what is already in the market from an existing inventory standpoint, whether we're talking sports facilities or retail. We want to do a void analysis and we want to understand what's there an opportunity for. We want to look at market opportunity from an upside perspective, and we might, on the hospitality front, be leveraging something like the Star Report, different from the Star Bonds, that is saying, here's how hotels are performing in this region. Here's their average daily rate, or ADR. Here's their occupancy load, and here's their seasonality, so that then we can determine, is there a need for a key, for more keys here? If so, what type of keys? Limited service, full service, extended stay, etc. So you're looking at the market opportunity. The second piece is going to be what's financially feasible. As you're having conversations about what works in the market, there's likely going to be a case where there is more opportunity than what you can bite off, either in terms of capital financing or in land. So that financial feasibility is really understanding, what do you have in terms of equity, debt, real estate, the tools, the tips, the piffs that we talked about, and other things that can come into that. And then last is really, how do we make this project real? And I think the best advice I can give there is take a team approach, bring others on the journey with you. And at the municipal level, that's going to look like the EDC or the Economic Development Council or whatever it's called in your community. It's going to look like the CVB or Convention and Visitors Bureau or the DMO, Destination Marketing Organization, that are coming to help. Parks and Recreation will want to have a voice in that. Don't forget the educators. Let's talk to K through 12 and the school districts. Let's talk to local colleges, universities, community colleges. They have needs, wants, desires too. And then you're going to want to engage in the community. And Ashley, to your point, if we just go out and ask the community, what do you want? And we do a blind survey, likely we're going to hear from the vocal minority, right? The hockey parents are going to rally the hockey players and parents and do a lot of survey responses. Same with the aquatics, same with the pickleballers. And we love aquatics and pickleball and hockey, but you tend to hear from the groups who need the facilities the most because they're expensive to build, expensive to operate. I think what's key about engaging the community is data, 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 data. You don't want to just do copycat syndrome and do what your neighbors did down the road or up the highway, but look at other existing facilities, developments, mixed-use complexes that look like what you're trying to do, and understand some of the important ingredients that went into that recipe, and then go find who in your community is going to bring the right level of stakeholders. And when we say stakeholder, what I mean by that, because it's not just a community member. Community members can benefit from this, and we love them. That's great. When I say stakeholder, someone that is vested in the upfront capitalization or the ongoing success of this facility. So that's someone that's going to have some skin in the game. And when you start to bring those different groups together, I think that's going to lead you down a path, Ashley, that's going to start to kind of lift the fog on what, or should we, or could we build here?
That makes sense. Now, we had a question come in from Alicia, and I think that relates to the data piece of what you just said, Eric. She asked, what are the metrics that determine the direct and indirect economic impact of different sports complexes and activities? And basically, how can that be used as a foundation for recruitment of new development? So maybe can you talk a little bit about that and the implication, maybe as well with you, Jake, on how do you work with that into developers and to getting, more of that development around if you already have a sports complex?
Yeah, so real quick, I want to just define 3 levels of economic impact. One, direct economic impact, and that is new spending in the market that would not be there if but for these events or for this venue. The second type is indirect or induced spending. That's essentially the ripple effect of when we spend a dollar, that dollar creates a job, that creates income, that creates spending. That is much, I'll say, more difficult to quantify, but there are some methodologies and metrics out there that we can leverage. And then last but not least is the construction impact, which is the one-time impact of creating jobs, engaging local subcontractors and contractors to bring a big, potentially multi-million plus dollar venue out of the ground. So to the question really specifically, I'm not saying this is right for all. With SFC, I can just speak to what we do. We really focus in on one-time construction impact because it is real and it's impactful. And then most importantly, direct economic impact because it's ongoing, it's repeatable, and it can unlock a lot of funding for us. We try to stay away from indirect impact sometimes because it's very easy to debunk or it's easy to poke holes in the math. And we don't like that. We want to come in and we want to have really solid, credible data. And if we have, a questionable number over here, it discredits all the other good work that we're doing throughout the process. And so I think the way that you can leverage the economic impact is use case studies to your advantage. We're going to talk about a few here in just a moment, but a lot of these publicly funded facilities or publicly supported projects in P3s, their CVBs or their DMOs are producing reports on an annual level that say, here's how much we generate in the market in terms of dollars, room nights, spending, et cetera. And when you can go and find those different case studies, those different reports, which are widely available on the internet, it allows you to come back and to really bring credibility to your plan to say, this isn't just a pipe dream. This isn't if you build it, they will come and they will spend. It's if we build it, we know they're coming because we've done our homework. We've got credible models. We've got case studies and we've got examples where we've proven this can come to life and be achievable here in our community.
Yep.
And then when you talk about economic impact, what I love about the P3, the growth in the P3 market, is more and more of that economic impact is happening in a way that can help fund the project. So if the economic impact is in hotel stays, and this is a tax that is based in a funding mechanism that utilizes hotel tax, that's great. If it's set up in some level of tax district and it's restaurants and it's hotels and it's retail spend that's happening within the district, that's how we take that economic impact and we utilize it to fund and bond one of these mixed use projects.
Important funding mechanism there in a lot of communities. So we're casting this awesome vision about like my background here, a beautiful mixed use development anchored by sports. Why isn't everybody doing this? There has to be some challenges involved, and putting something together like this. Some of them are a little bit probably self-evident, but Eric, why don't you lead us off on this? How hard is it? What are some of the challenges that people come up against when we're trying to do something like this?
Yeah, look, if it was easy, there would be one of these on every corner in any town USA. I mean, because when we go out and we talk to communities and we see people at trade shows or we're out in just doing our work, there's not many communities that don't want a really cool mixed use development and great sports and recreation and entertainment facilities. The reason that these aren't on every street corner is they are difficult. These are multi-year, multi-million, very diverse developments to bring out of the ground. And oftentimes what we found when there is a market idea and there's the conception to bring something like this to the community, it's often never been done before in that community. And so one of the things that we have to do in that 1 to 3 year development process is we need to educate the market. And educating the market is not something that's easy. You're going to have public officials who are going to be looking at their political risk with a project like this. And if it goes and it's great and it's super impactful, they're all going to want to be up there at the front podium for a picture, right? If it's one of those where all of a sudden it's like, ooh, this seems really risky, I'm not, as Mr. or Mrs. Mayor, going to put my professional credibility on the line for this project that's not fully baked. I think educating with data, with real examples is important. And then I think really understanding the financial reality. Sports in general is a high dollar, but low to no margin endeavor. And if we look at the world that Parks and Recreation comes from, it's often a red line in the municipal budget. And it's something that's been funded and subsidized and supported because we know that these are important to our communities, our families, our kids, and the future health and wellness of our society. And so understanding the financial reality that if all of a sudden we have a $50 million vision, it doesn't cost $50 million. It costs $50 million plus the operational support to get the destination established and to get the engine cranking to a level that now it's generating enough revenue to cover its operational costs. And it's starting now to contribute to its debt service and to its upfront capitalization. And that's part of why these mixed use developments are so appealing. Up to 80% of the revenue generated by a sports tourism venue is spent outside the walls or outside the fence of that venue. What these mixed use developments are doing is they're extending the fence. What we're now looking at is how can we capture that revenue in restaurants, in retail, in entertainment. And when we do that, we're casting a wider net, which also casts a wider bucket to catch dollars in. And when we're doing that, that's the financial reality that we need to build a story around. We need to bring stakeholders along. We need to educate the market, and we need to get the municipal leaders comfortable with this is the right thing to do in our community for all these reasons.
There's a follow-up question here, a couple questions that have come in really on the theme of are these ever totally privately invested, and owned in the private sector? And so I think what you just talked about, Eric's really important there on the financial reality and maybe why or why not municipal support is really important. So do you want to maybe expand on that a little bit in terms of
Sure.
the private investment side?
Yeah. Are they ever? Absolutely. There are cases, and I can point to one right up the road here. We're in Clearwater, Florida, in Orlando. Disney Wide World of Sports is one of the biggest destinations to come in. And now you look at it, and you're like, well, that's not really fair. Disney's like its own city, and it is. But that's why they were early movers and shakers and were able to privately finance that because they were capturing the value of the destination. When we look at it from this traditional private investment into a sports tourism venue, not likely. And here's why. If you're going to try to drive sports tourism versus just community recreation, you need to overbuild the facility for the market. When you overbuild the facility for the market, if you don't have those mechanisms to capture the value you create, you are now subsidizing and funding a revenue vehicle for 80% of the rest of the community, not for what's staying within your venue. And so if we're talking about mixed use development in sports tourism and community recreation, those are not often just privately invested in. They often do leverage those public mechanisms and dollars to help capture that value. There are examples of kind of one-offs out there that have been established and they're highly successful and they've created community around them. But those often didn't set out to be a sports anchored mixed use development. They started out as a sports complex and then the mixed use development came around it because the halo effect of that destination driver.
Excellent. All right, I'm going to ask one more question. We're going to talk about some case studies. We'll get back to some more questions. For you, Jake, a couple questions here about, is there an ideal property size or acreage, either for the facility itself or the overall development? What's the scale here that we're talking about? Because certainly that's both on the financing side and the execution side, where you are in the country, land costs, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in that P3 mentality, you want to know what your toolbox is and what you have. So land is a big piece of that. And an indoor is a much smaller footprint than an outdoor facility. So in a lot of regions where you have a lot of land and it might be 100+ acre type of development, that's where there's a lot of opportunity for outdoor sports. You need a lot more land, but it's going to draw people to a region that maybe don't have a reason to be there without. Indoor is a lot more dense. So, we're talking, probably more in that 15 to 30 to 40 acre, depending on the size of the facility. And then additional for the retail and the things along those lines that are needed to support that, which is going to be a little bit different in each community.
Absolutely. So I think that's a great transition into looking at a few of these that are in development or currently operating. We've got a couple case studies to share here. And again, we're going to leave some more time for Q&A along the way. But we've got first kicking off here, AdventHealth Sports Park at Blue Hawk, an incredible project. Jake, why don't you tell us a little bit about how this project is coming together?
Yeah, it's a premier example in this country. And this is opening here in the fall of 2024. So right around the corner. And it's a 260,000 square foot in phase one field house that really has the basketball, volleyball, really the hard courts, because it's going to be utilized in a lot of different ways to drive traffic and drive events and drive sports programming. It's got turf capabilities. It has an NHL ice sheet. It's got sports performance and specialty training, esports. It's got a lot of family entertainment elements, which are used to enhance that facilities experience as well as drive additional revenue, and sports academy. So this project's in South Overland Park, Kansas. At the doorstep, something that's really unique about this facility that the owner and client really talks to about a lot, is you are closer to the front steps of this multi-use lifestyle center than you are from your car. So when you park and you go there, you're right at the doorstep. And I don't know of another one in the country that's going to have that level of experience for the state of play and for that overall mixed use development experience that this facility. So shout out to, Kent Price, the Price brothers, Bart Lowen, and the team that has really done a great job of pulling a whole, that when we talked about the team, right? JLL, who's the retailer, is pulling the right retailers into this facility or into this project, and the architect and the contracting team that are building this. It's really going to be a unique destination in the country as it opens. And you can see right there, the 23,000 room nights that are forecast in year one. That's going to drive, a hotel as this is hotel ready. I think at the end, it's going to have over 1.5 million square feet of retail commercial space that's going to benefit from that overall destination.
Eric, anything you want to layer in there on this amazing project at Blue?
Yeah, I think Jake nailed it. This is this is one of the premier examples of sports anchored mixed use development. And when you add in the health, wellness, hospitality, retail, entertainment, it just checks all the boxes. The thing that I'd highlight here is this is an example of the Star Bond program at work. And so this is in one of the states that has the Star Bond program there in Kansas, and it allows it to be successful in getting that sales tax rebate.
Okay, let's move on to another example. This one's cool because it's a redevelopment. So these do not always have to be on greenfield spaces. They can be brownfield redevelopments. Eric, can you kind of lead us through what is Rhythm and Rally? How did it come to be?
Yeah, this is an exciting project, and I think this checks a lot of the boxes that we're talking about today. Ashley, you nailed it. This is the redevelopment of a common story in our communities around the country is we've got vacant big box and we've got dilapidated malls. And one of the things that we're looking at is how can we redevelop those different properties? And oftentimes column spacing and ceiling heights are really challenging. And so to use the existing structure, turf doesn't necessarily work, ice doesn't necessarily work, courts can be tough to fit between 25 and 40 foot spacings with columns. Pickleball does fit. And so here in Macon, Georgia, awesome vision by the mayor, the community officials, the staff to say, we want to revitalize this part of our community and create an awesome and reimagine this mixed use development. So what they did is they took the mall, and part of it now serves as government services building. Part of it, 150,000 square feet of former Belk's department store, is now the largest indoor pickleball dedicated facility in the country, if not the world. And in that 150,000 square feet, they've got over 32 dedicated courts. What sits right outside, and you can see it in the bottom corner there, is an amphitheater that can support over 10,000 people for different types of venues. And so if you look at if you look at the indoor tournament opportunity for pickleball and you look at the outdoor destination for entertainment, this project's going to generate over $100 million of direct economic impact annually. That is an enormous number and an incredible impact to Macon. And what it's going to allow them to do then is to really look at this area around Rhythm and Rally and see how can we reinvest and continue to support its success. This was one that was, I'll say, more publicly led, in that the municipality issued $44 million of bonds to pay for the amphitheater and to pay for the build out of the indoor space. But it's still a public-private partnership, and that they've got private operators in there running the day-to-day and helping to program what's happening. And just to think about this, it's the world's largest pickleball, but even in the community of Macon, it's up over 500 members, which is incredible and outperforming its early projections.
100%. You mentioned the visionary Mayor Lester Miller there in Macon. The CVB had a hand in it. I also want to mention in Georgia, they have business improvement districts with ad valorem taxes. So the Eisenhower Business Improvement District, this is part of that. So when you think about that P3, again, there's other ways that you can interact with that business community, even outside the immediate development there. Okay, one more example and we'll go to some Q&A here. So Emerald Acre Sports Connection, very cool. This is in my home state of Illinois, downstate Illinois. So Jake, why don't you tell us a little bit about this one?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a P3 with a really supportive community in Mattoon, Illinois, and Rural King on the private side as well. And, who had came to the table with some land and everything else that kind of came together. And you can see that this is a 135,000 square foot indoor field house that has that basketball, volleyball court type of facility that can run all those type of events, paired with, because they had the additional land and it was a great fit to drive additional traffic, those 16 plus outdoor fields. And those are multi-use fields. To the point that Eric made earlier, we can play soccer on almost every single one of these fields, and you can play diamond sports on almost every single one of these fields, which really allows a bigger draw in traffic. So you can see, kind of that outline, the commercial development that's in this district that's being driven is bringing something really unique to this facility, which is another real goal of the community and of the owner, is they wanted a place that, everybody was proud of and that would draw people there to live there, to stay working at their corporate headquarters and to grow that community. That $23.8 million of direct economic impact, they've done a great job of creating an overall project that captures a good chunk of that which is allowing this project to happen.
Absolutely. Eric, anything to add on Emerald Acres here?
The one thing I might just point out is when you look at these field configurations, great example of diversification and density of use. Each of those long fields has small diamond configuration for youth baseball and softball. And then the larger 400-foot fields also have the opportunity to host soccer, lacrosse, flag football.
Absolutely. I know we could go on and on about these examples. We've got about 10 minutes here. We've had a ton of questions. So before we dive into some, I want to let you know, if you sent us a question and we don't get to it right now, we will email you with the answer to your question. We had so many come in, we're not gonna be able to get to them all, but we will circle back with you. We'll also, in our recap email following this, give you the recording of the webinar and an opportunity to connect with someone on your team if you have further questions, that sort of thing. So with that in mind, we had a question come in from Daniel. He says, have you worked with any clients or have experience with projects that also include a motor sports component, road racing, drag strip, kart racing, etc., in addition to the usual youth sports such as basketball or volleyball?
Yeah, I'll take this one. The short answer is yes. We've worked with some really cool ones. We worked with a community out in Colorado right now that's looking to develop a really cool motocross and kind of Moto X type opportunity. We worked with the Texplex, which was a side-by-side ATV, UTV destination that also drives different types of weddings and other types of events. And then we've also seen a lot of communities, and right here down the road, St. Pete's a great example of it, where they've used their sports tourism effort to create one-off opportunities, whether it's bringing in the power boats offshore, it's bringing in the Grand Prix downtown, looking at ways to set up and create infrastructure that can support these special purpose uses with Octane Sports, and at the same time, not necessarily having dedicated purpose-built venues. And so it's all over the map. Yes, we've seen it as part of the destination, and we've also seen some really cool ways to flex up to host more types of power sport activities.
All right, next question here. Thanks for that, Eric. Next question from Demand. What are the pitfalls of sports complex development, and should they be included in mixed use zoning or have separate district zoning?
Yeah, one thing we've seen is, these be really successful in a lot of zoning that was already zoned for recreation, because municipal golf courses, maybe as an example, that might not be performing super well. They might already be zoned for recreation, and that really creates an opportunity for these to come in and serve an anchor that meets the current zoning. Generally, coming in with that overall plan and the zoning up front really allows to capture as many of those P3, but it is going to vary a little bit by municipality, maybe what zoning's in place, and the process that you would have to go through in order to get it either rezoned or the BDD process in your area.
Yeah, and I'll throw in one other just thought, is that go back to my high dollar, low to no margin comment. There have been examples where the sports complex is the anchor to the larger mixed use development, but it stays either in municipal ownership so that it doesn't have real estate taxes, or it's put into a special purpose nonprofit entity because it creates tax exempt revenue bond opportunities and other funding mechanisms that come with that tax exemption status.
Absolutely. Okay, maybe time for two more questions. The next one, there's a couple that are in this vein from Kinley, though. Any advice or ideas for hosting more multi-use activities in an already established facility? And I'll layer in real quick because there's a couple like this. So the question I think is really, if you have an existing facility, can you do this? Can you kind of back into more of a mixed use experience?
Yeah, I'll touch the surface on it and then I'll kick it over to Jake because I think I'm gonna lead you down the path. For me, it comes from what can you do in your existing box to create different types of uses? And there are a bunch of great examples with floor covering, for example. If you've got hardwood courts, there are different types of floor coverings that you can go and you can put down everything from just don't scratch it to we can drive vehicles on it and all different grades in between. For ice, there are surfaces that we can put down and we can either put hard surfaces over the ice or we can melt down the ice and we can use it for other types of activities, maybe during non-peak ice programming times of the year. And then from a retrofit ability standpoint on the outdoor side, a lot of times when we see the existing footprint of a grass complex, consider the capital improvement of going to turf. They look at how can we maybe move the fences or reconfigure the fields, diamonds, whatever the case may be, to accommodate more uses. And so I think for me, Jake, where my mind went with surfaces.
Absolutely. And it's about density, right? How are we driving the most possible traffic so that, dense sports that are a little bit more compact can do that with smaller areas, and doing things like you mentioned, Eric, turf, you no longer have to let it rest. So now you can do it every single weekend, which is going to create more of that impact, which is going to allow you to maybe even fund that upgrade.
Okay, last question. And I think we touched on this, but if maybe we can find an example here. There's a few questions here on the investment mix between public and private. Who does what? And what do they want out of it? So I know we've got some great examples. We've talked about star bonds. We've talked about districting. But what are some other ways that either, the municipal government side and those private investors sort of come to the table to make these things happen?
Yeah, I'll take the first crack at it. I think you got to start with the knowns. So real estate, right? These are typically land intensive projects. Having an understanding for how are we going to pay for the land or create a ground lease or do something to make the real estate available. That's a massive building block. And it's one that then impacts your zoning, your entitlements, all of the different things, your even opportunity to work into some of those different financial instruments is going to be predicated on the land, where it's at, how much it is, all those different types of things. So I'd solve for that first. I do think there is a proverbial chicken and the egg between what goes first, the public dollar or the private dollar. And I'll say we've seen it work both ways. We've seen it where the public municipality said, hey, here's what we're able to do on our own. Who can come help us maximize this and take it further? We've also seen it where we start out to say, hey, from a private debt and equity perspective, here's how far we can get. But we know it would be so much better if we could get here. Municipality, can you help us cover that gap? So we've seen it come from who puts their dollars in first from both sides. There is no one. But what I would say is a lot of times the snowball effect, right? You got to figure out where you can get the first part of the snowball made. And then as you push it down the hill, it gets bigger and bigger. I think you start with those big rocks. So for me, it's land, it's senior debt. Are we going to leverage debt or are we going to have an equity-based project? If we're going to leverage debt, who is our debtor? Do we have a relationship with them? Can we get a letter of intent, et cetera? On the equity side, these are capital intensive projects. So when you talk about the mixed use developers that are out there getting these done, they're accustomed to spending 6-7 figures in due diligence before a project even is real, right? And that level of risk isn't certainly for everybody, but I think it is what's necessary on some of these larger, more grand visions like the one behind Ashley. And so I think you start with those, start with land, start with debt, understand equity. And then I think understanding those different financial instruments that are out there. There are a lot of great organizations who can help you uncover that. And there are groups like John Hanson at IRR, who does a great job of understanding municipal funding mechanisms and working with communities to understand what could be or how you can deploy different tools in the toolbox. But I would say start with the big rocks and then kind of fill in the pebbles in the sand, because you're not going to get as far from a credibility standpoint if you don't have some of those bigger variables solved for early in your equation.
Thank you so much, Eric Sullivan, Jake Whitaker, for sharing your expertise in the space. And everyone out there, be well and let us know if we can help you. We're here to serve. Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you all.
Thank you.